You know, I always like to say that I love all my guests. I have guests that come from all walks of life and bring a lot of wisdom to the show. But just like, parents, as much as you don't want to admit it, you have favorite kids, right? And so I've been really looking forward to this guest today because I don't know, Elizabeth, I feel like you and I think about a lot of things in a lot of the same way. And so it's really nice to come together with somebody that shares some of your vision. And we'll talk much more about what that vision is. So I've been really looking forward to this podcast and I'm really excited to get this thing going. And I would say Elizabeth came on my radar from, I was doing a joint project, as many of you know, with Paula Reed, the adventure psychologist. And so she asked me to do a contributing chapter in that book. And Elizabeth was also one of the contributing authors. And that's how it came on my radar. And I remember Paula, when I interviewed her, she talked about this thing, SISU. And I go, wow, that sounds familiar or really fascinating. I've never heard of it. And so after we got done with the podcast, I went and Googled it and I looked for SISU. Where can I find more? But I didn't know how to spell it. And so I couldn't find anything. Every spelling I tried, I could not find it. And so for all of you listeners, it's SISU. So if you want to go check out SISU, if you want to Google it, or maybe nowadays you just want to use Chat GPT and see what Chat GPT says about it. We're going to talk much more about that as we get going here. But that's how I learned about Elisabet. And I'll be honest, Elisabet, I went out and read one of your, I think it was a research article. And if I remember right, it won an award or something like, I don't know, best research article of the year. And I remember I was taken back of, not only did I like the content, but I like, wow, this is a scientist that actually can write. Which is yeah, there's not a whole lot of that going around. I hate to say it, but so I was very intrigued by not only the content, but also the way you wrote. So let me just say, welcome to the show, Elisabet. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. What a beautiful intro and to kind of warm up the space. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here having this SISU jam with you.
Yes. And I love the way the kind of the words you use. Warm up the space. I like that. And it fits well with the stuff we're going to talk about today with your book.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about, what's that book called? Your book is, let me see from my notes here. Gentle Power, a revolution in how we think, lead, and succeed using the Finnish art of SISU. So much in there that I like. I like the word revolution. I believe where we're going with this is hopefully a revolution. I also like the fact that you have lead in there because I am a leadership professor. So I'm educating hopefully the leaders of tomorrow. And so as I read this book, I'm going to be teaching a course this summer in leadership and it's called Leading Oneself. And I'm like, wow, this might be the book that I have them read as required reading. I'm liking it that much. I'm about a third of the way through it and I'm just digging it. So that's awesome. So let's kind of get into this. Number one, where are you calling from? Where are you at, Elisabet?
I'm in the so-called SISU capital of the world, which is Helsinki. So it's the capital of Finland, my native country. Yeah,
halfway around the world. Well, let's just get right into it. What is for people like me, roughly a year ago? What does SISU mean?
So SISU is the inner fire, the fortitude, the life force that will keep you going when you have come to a place where you feel or assume that you have used all the resources that you have. So it's the place or the zone or the fortitude that begins when we are past our preconceived capacities. When we think we are done, yet we stay with the task a little more longer, and we find what I love this, how William James, he's my science hero, the man who pretty much, well, he's the father of psychology because he did the first classes in Harvard about 100 years ago. And he used this term second wind or third wind or fourth wind. And he oftentimes in his papers discussed this energy within humans and said that we oftentimes don't push ourselves far enough to realize that we have this second or third or fourth wind. But he's very wise because he also said that in addition to pushing ourselves, we also must repair ourselves with rest. So again, there's this, how I look at SISU, I'm bringing in the soft and the tough, the gentle and the power. All of human life is wrapped around these polarities and these dualisms. And that's why it's so interesting, because it's hard to bring two opposite things together in one life or one thought, so it's quite a journey.
There's so much there that's interesting. Number one, let's say, all right, so let's be clear. Elisabet and I have both, dabbled in long distance ultra running. Elisabet more than I, at least in the long distances. But what we're talking about here is not just the physical. Is that correct? It's maybe the mental, intellectual, anything we have to do in life, any hard things, it applies to that as well. Is that true?
Yeah, and I would love to mention book by Stephen Pressfield, which is called The War of Art. And Stephen describes his own journey with being an author and how long it took him to actually get the book out that was inside him, his masterpiece, And he describes this character or this force that prevents people from doing all the things that they want to do, which is standing in the way of every single achievement, even the most basic thing of picking up and going to the gym or showing up to our partner in the best way we can. And it's what he calls resistance, so it's something that shows up every single time when there's something that's calling to us. And he says that the more meaningful the task for our personal development or our calling, the bigger the resistance. And so I love this concept because it feels like it is a dance partner to SISU, because SISU is that thing that every time when we, in like a micro level, every time when we have to push through, almost like this shell that is holding us back, it's anchoring us into something old, or it's a narrative or a negative thought pattern or something like that. And there is this moment when we kind of push beyond that. And I would say that's a moment of micro SISU. While I say this, it's very important to note that SISU in its bare essence, it is life force. It is the will to live, to keep on fighting. I'll just mention one thing now that I still remember it, because we're going to veer off to different topics. But I recently went to see this movie called SISU, which is by Jalmari Helander, who's a Finnish director. And the movie is a bit Quentin Tarantino style. It's violent and it's really crazy. But it tells the story of this old Finnish man who lives in Lapland, and he gets into, there's basically an army of Nazis that want to kill him and take his gold that he found. And the resistance that he shows toward them to go onwards and overcome what is going on. And there's a moment when these people are talking about this man, Aatami Korpi, and they describe him as a man that, he's not immortal, but he simply refuses to die. So that's the attitude of SISU. And why I do love this movie, when one looks at it as a metaphor, like all those thoughts that come to our mind, all that stuff that tells us that we're not worthy, we can't do it, all the past failures and all that stuff that can really get us down. And I know it because I have been there. So I need to take that same attitude that Aatami Korpi has, the fierceness and the fortitude, and point it out to those thoughts and those hurdles that are standing in front of me. I mean, It's sometimes really like it's a matter of life and death almost when I look at this world and how badly a lot of people near me and in the world are doing, so it's an important topic to discuss what we're talking about. And I love that your podcast is called Forging Mettle. It's really about the spirit and the fire, not just like mental toughness, but we're really going into the heart of it, what keeps us alive.
Gosh,
I'm really
yes.
excited.
Yes, and I'm smiling, and if you're watching on this video, we're certainly going to get into the gentle side of it, and the soft side of it that you mentioned, but I want to stick with this a little bit. You and I both know by doing hard things, for example, and I always like to tell my listeners, you don't have to go out and run a long ultra run to get this, but and maybe you would agree, Elisabet, it has been one of the best training grounds for me to go out and do really physically hard things. And so you talk about this idea that a lot of people, they have the second wind, but they don't get to it, and so, and I know from experience, that voice gets really loud. Before we get to that second wind, that voice in your head is going to do everything in its power to try to get you to quit. So my question to you, Elisabet, what guidance do you have for people to push through that to get to that second win or that third win that we all have? I love that you say that, because we all have this. Our ancestors had this. We have it, and we need to tap into it. But how do we do that? How does the average person tap into that?
Well, I can describe how I have done it and how I do it. So in its essence, SISU is a call to come really to the basics. After all the thousands of miles that I ran and the hundreds of pages that I, have written about SISU, conceptualizing it and going to the nitty-gritty and all that. And ultimately, where I'm going now, that it's coming to the basics, to the very kind of small things that I do in my daily life. So when one looks at SISU, it's nothing but magic. If you ask me, there's nothing magical about SISU, really. It's like the core essence of every single individual, and that essence wants to remain there. Its only job is to keep you alive, and on top of that, to push through that resistance, so you can keep kind of how Socrates allegedly said, that the examined life, or he asked that if the unexamined life is worth living or not. But so the question is not so much how do we get more SISU, for example. The question is, and the answer lies in what we do on our daily routines that help build foundation, so that when those moments come, when we do need to overcome, when we do need to push ourselves, that we wouldn't come to those moments unprepared and surprised, So it is about building routines that help the person, help you, help I, to build more life force in our lives. So those include very basic things, which everyone knows, which is how we take care of our physical bodies, sleep, foundational quality. I recently heard a podcast that was with a psychiatric ward nurse, and they said that when people come to the psych ward, the first thing they do is they make those people sleep, because that's the first thing that goes when we're really disturbed and distracted, is that sleep tends to get compromised. So the first thing to look at it is like, are we taking care of ourselves through the physical part, sleeping, the nutrition, the movement, all of these basic things. And then starting with a simple thing, making a regime for that. Well, then the second thing that I would do to make it more likely that we're able to push through in those tough moments, again, not just to wait that surprisingly somehow I'm going to have this energy. We do hit home and we do manage to tap into SISU randomly, all of us, because it is so pervasively in us, but my interest lies in how do we make it more structured? How do we make it more likely, more systematic in our lives? So the second thing is if you think of the metaphor of someone who's ultra runner, or let's say even better, you're a boxer. So when you know that you have a big fight coming, there's not a boxer in this world who would just simply show up at the mat, at the arena. But what happens before that is repetition. You simulate those experiences. You work on yourself to see, like, where do I have these energy leaks? Is it in my mind? Is it again in the physical side that I'm not practicing and taking care of myself? And there's a really awesome, I heard this from a close friend recently, that, more important than, let's say, okay, you're also a PhD and I'm a PhD, but more important than that is the PHW, which is the pure hard work that we need to put into anything where we want to excel. And it's crazy how much effort people might put in their career progress, for example, or in some kind of a hobby. Why would we not put that same conviction and effort into showing up in these areas of our life that relate to our life force? So I don't have a magic pill that do this and you're going to have SISU, but it's really an invitation to gently build those routines in our lives. Grab a friend, do it with your partner, do it with your kids, and build that kind of a landing pad from where you can explore that fabric of life force in the life.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm summarizing this, and I'm jotting down notes here. You can develop this. I think you would agree. This is something that all of us have this power to develop and enhance through PHW, right? Pure hard work.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. I also took down a note here. You mentioned energy leaks. Can you talk more about that? So, I always like to talk about the idea that energy is finite, right? There's some wonderful books out there that will say that time is not the most valuable resource we have. It's actually our energy. And so when you talk about energy leaks, I go, that's interesting. What does that mean, Elisabet, to have those energy leaks, and maybe how do we plug those energy leaks so that we're not losing maybe energy to something we don't want to lose? I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what do you say to that?
Yeah, I love that you picked up that from all the ocean of words that I just blurted out. So very, very attuned. I would say that the healthiest or the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to life force and SISU is to actually look at where we are leaking it out, instead of going on this massive journey to kind of try to secure it or all of that. Oftentimes it comes down to just noticing where we are off alignment. And I would say off alignment, and use, for example, running as a metaphor. And I think you may relate to this maybe, because most of us, when we get really tired on the long journey, we have kind of a default off posture where we start to kind of, when the muscles get super tired, and you kind of start to a little bit slip off from your good posture. So someone starts to lean on to the left a little bit, or someone develops like some kind of a weird gait, something happens. But that's really bad, because you're actually in danger of creating some kind of a injury. And you're also using more energy because you're not in alignment with how you are when you're optimally going. How we notice when these energy leaks happens is, and this is a key point, I would say, of the podcast, of anything we maybe speak from my perspective. And it is to develop and start to focus on having awareness of what is happening inside our body, what is happening with our thoughts, what kind of thoughts are we entertaining and letting in, what kind of an environment do we surround ourselves with? Like also, like, what kind of people are we on a daily basis interacting with? Are they interactions where they are life-giving in a way that I give life to them? of course, gotta first look at myself. And also, are the people who are in my life, are they pulling me constantly down? Is there like passive aggressiveness, or are they looking at me, with these like eyes of wonder, and warmth that I always speak about, that we have this option to choose to look at each other with the kind of eyes that there is a kind of elevation that can happen in the other person, because we're so trigger sensitive to all the threats that are out there. Our brain is scanning for it constantly. So it is our responsibility to build those environments between us that can also kind of remind us, that we have what it takes. We have this SISU and this life force. And I have to say now that I completely forgot what your question was. So maybe you can bring me back to track.
I think you were doing well. I was really kind of just
Okay.
asking about what do those energy leaks look like, and how do we manage those energy leaks?
Mm,
And again, I feel like
yeah.
you're right on. Let me share a story real quick that I think might play into this. So it was about a year ago that both Elisabet and I were deep into writing the chapter for Paul Reed's book. I have a really sneaky suspicion that Elisabet had a lot of other things on her plate too, as did I. So we were both busy, and I was reaching out to Elisabet to try to say, "Hey, I'd love to get you on the podcast." And we went back and forth with a few emails, and I'm trying to remember where you were in the world, man. I want to say Bali or somewhere like that. But anyway, we went back and forth, and at the end of the day, we didn't hook up. We didn't find the time. And I look back through my emails as I prepared for this, and it wasn't. You never really said no. It was, I would call it a soft no, but it was kind of
Mm,
like, I'm too busy right now, Ron, and maybe we need to revisit this at another time. And so I reached out again, I don't know, about a month ago, and I said, Elisabet, I don't know if you remember me. We tried to get this set up, and in your graciousness, you apologized and that sort of thing. I said, you know what? I think sometimes one of the best things we can do is say no. And maybe that's an energy leak. I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts on that, Elisabet. But, I think there's two things here. Number one, you had the courage to tell me no. And I didn't take it personal. I just said, hey, Elisabet's busy right now. It's not a personal attack on me. But I see a lot of people that are afraid to say no, especially the people
mm,
pleasers out there like me. I'm going to put my hand up,
mm,
recovering people pleaser. It really bothers me to tell people no, but could that be an energy leak?
mm. I feel like you read my mind because when I was answering your question, I remembered the little email exchange we had just when we were preparing for this, and you mentioned this story. And I was kind of hoping that maybe we'll loop back to it because it was such a uh, juicy topic to kind of dive into, really. And I would almost say that, if someone wants to take a practice or a homework with them from this podcast to like take it to the practical side, even if someone would focus on learning to tell the difference between a no and a yes, and learn to say no and just practice that for the next, I don't know, 10 years, nothing else, just really getting into the nuances of that. It is my guess that just by that simple exercise, you can gain an immense amount of knowledge about yourself, about relationships and how to be, and about yourself and about your life force, Um, and I was thinking when I was kind of musing on this yes and no dichotomy that, as adults, it would seem that it would be the most basic thing to do to know how to say a yes and to know how to say a no. But because as we grow up, we layer ourselves with all kinds of patterns, and we're so deeply guided by our need to belong, by our need to be loved, by our need to not feel shame, that we end up kind of messing up our circuitry. And for a lot of us, it can be a coping mechanism all the way from childhood, that we know how we get that belongingness by always being there. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. I have made great strides with it in the past years, I would say, but it was a hard school. And it goes into this topic that I discuss in the book, which is the difference between being nice versus kind. And when we're being nice, we end up sometimes crossing our boundaries and giving these yeses or when we don't actually mean them, because we want to establish that connection. We're not willing to take the risk that there's some kind of a consequence when we refuse something that we're offered. And on the other hand, sometimes when we do say no, and there's the fear that someone will get hurt. How I've trained that in my own life is I've consciously learned how to endure rejection. Like I made it a little curriculum in my own life where I made it a focus. And this is how I've developed anything in my life, that I make it a focus point. And then I really start to kind of look at those moments in my social interactions where it might happen. And today, it's I always carry a book with me, for example, if I'm going to meet someone. If they would even at the last minute, for some reason, not show up or something happens, I haven't built everything around that. So there's always a flow of events, so that I don't also impose that kind of immense amount of strain on the other person, that they must be there every time. But when we say yes to people when we don't mean it, or no when we don't mean it, and we are in the place of nice, we are giving our power away instead of empowering ourselves by speaking our truth. When we are kind, which is different, we say what actually needs to be said in a moment, and we speak from a place of our truth. So being kind is really a school in honesty. And I would say that it's the only way to truly build good, solid, long-lasting relationships that are not what I call in the book entanglements, which I think a lot of these relationships between people are, that we just don't know, and it's a lot of it is our nervous systems kind of guiding the game. I'll add one more thing to this. When I was practicing how to say no and how to say yes, the first thing I had to do was to actually learn to detect, like, what is my no and what is my yes, because sometimes we say no when we mean yes, and we say yes when we mean no. And there's that subtle tiny nudge when someone asks for us for a favor or something, and we would like to show up for various reasons, but we know that, okay, in this moment I actually need to maybe take care of my own life force. And when we start to give more space for ourselves to kind of honor the truth within us, that voice comes a little bit louder and louder, and it becomes easier for us to kind of notice it. And then after a lot of no's, maybe someone needs to take a month and just say no to everything, for a while. Eventually, from that honest place of no, we can start to build the yes, because we do need to also show up to the people in our lives. But when we do it with honesty, there's less risk of us building resentment, that we keep saying yes, and underneath we kind of resent the people because they keep pushing stuff on our plate and we can't really do it. But it's up to us, it's always that personal self-leadership in that sense as well, and personal responsibility.
I like that. And again, I feel like this is something that I know several of my close friends that struggle with saying no, and a lot of my students. And so I think that that'd be a good thing to practice is, can we say no? And I think hidden in there, Elisabet, is we learn by doing this, we learn that we can still be loved and we can still be accepted even when we say no, hopefully if we're surrounded by the right people. And I would say if those people don't love you and accept you when you say no, then maybe they're not the right people in your life. So it's okay, even though that primitive part of our brain is going to make it seem like this is life or death. If Elisabet rejects me, I don't know, I'm going to die. And I say that jokingly, and I know Elizabeth, you agree with this, but that's what our brain sometimes will trick us into
Yeah.
thinking. This is a survival situation. If somebody rejects me, I'm going to be kicked out of the tribe, and that's going to mean a
Mm,
certain death sentence. And so we just got to play with that, right? We got to say, okay, say no. What was the worst that happened? What happened? I said no,
mm,
and when what happened? I still like Elizabeth.
mm.
She said no. We're still friends. It's a little different when it's maybe a complete stranger like I am, but it's probably harder to say no to close friends, right? Or family. But
Mm,
I think this is all around those boundaries, right? Of protecting,
mm,
you can only do so much in this world, this life. You only have so much energy. Where are you going to spend it? And
mm,
sometimes we need to honor that, as you said, that life force to say no. I don't have that energy to give you.
mm. And the thing is, like, who are we showing up as if we say a yes when we mean no? We're not appearing as we are, but we are giving kind of like a other or false version of ourselves. So we're not in a place of honest relating. And for me nowadays, it's a curious, beautiful place to kind of, maybe it's because I'm, finally past 40. I'm turning 42 this year. So at
Ooh,
some point in life, you just got to start being who you are and take the risk. Like, not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to like your no, but that also acts as a little bit of a roadmap for me. Like, are we playing the same with the same rule book of honesty? Because when I encounter a very strong reaction to a no, I can see that there is some kind of maybe, um, we all have wounding, but we all are also called to work on our wounding. So the thing is to use all of those little encounters as moments or windows into ourselves, that we get data, like, where do I get triggered when someone says a no, or do I have the courage to say? And when we just slow down and kind of dive into that, there's a whole world of understanding that lies for us, that is waiting for us. And one of my favorite quotes in the whole world really is from Carl Jung, and it goes along the lines of that: until we bring that which is unconscious into our consciousness, we call it becomes our fate. Basically, it becomes our life, and it will guide us when we'll call it our fate. So all of this work that I'm inviting people into this journey through the book, and is just to bring more awareness to why we behave, why we do, because that gives us more spaciousness to really act instead of react so much.
yes, I love that. And that's what I would offer as well, is if you have a strong reaction to somebody saying no to you, I would say look inside and say, why am I reacting
Mm,
that way? And there's probably something in there to kind of dig
mm,
out. The other thing I would say as we move on, I think we need to move on from this topic. I love this topic, but what I would offer to the listeners also, and sometimes as because I've done some of this inner work as well, and sometimes instead of I don't have the courage to say no, so what do I do if I don't have the courage to say no? I'll say something really soft like, well, maybe I'll get back to you, and I'll see if I can fit this in, or something like that, right? So it's not necessarily a no, but in my mind I know I just want to say no, but I don't have the
mm.
courage to do that. So be careful with that, maybe straddling the fence of not saying yes or no and just giving this very vague answer. People do this all the time, and that can be a problem too. Same as Elizabeth said, is that authentic? No, it's not. Most of the time it's not.
Yeah, and it simplifies things. Like, it really just makes it so much more simple, and people will respond to honesty. There is an energy to it, almost, that I would say, when you just say it how it is, and you can be polite and gentle about it. That's the thing with the gentle power. Have your no, have very strong boundaries. Every single person who I've met who is exemplifying a lot of gentleness and love, and has their kind of life together, that they're not overextending themselves, all of those people have very, very firm boundaries. as far as I have witnessed them, but they're able to communicate those boundaries with love and with gentleness.
Wonderful. Let's transition that. You keep talking, honesty. We talk about honesty, showing up and being authentic, but you're also using these words, gentleness, and really, I don't know if you've said softness, but I think that's a little bit of what your book is all about as well. And so we started this conversation talking about something called SISU, which I think you described that as maybe an embodied fortitude. So, for us, outside of Finland, we might say, okay, that sounds like a lot like mental toughness, right? To be tough, to push on when it's really hard. Okay, that's one element of it, but you're also bringing in this other element of that's not always the right answer. I always like to say mental toughness is great. It's like a hammer, but when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And there's an element of life that needs that softness, that gentleness, that you use the word yin and yang. So it's that strength and that softness, that kindness. So talk more about that. Why is that so important I mean, we're missing half the equation if we just talk about toughness, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like let's bring in the whole color palette, into this wild experience of human life and human relating. As I was preparing for a podcast, I was just I checked in. There's a really nice article at Harvard Business Review. It's already from 2015 from Emma Seppälä. She's a researcher at Yale, and her focus is compassion. So she's a compassion researcher, and Emma has written this piece so a long time ago. And the title, if I remember correctly, is "Why is Compassion a much more better managerial approach than toughness?" So that's a good article for people to check out who want. But she describes how she names Amy Cuddy, and she names Jonathan Haidt and Adam Grant and some of these people who've been researching pro-social behavior in leadership and compassion and kindness. And what happens is when I take it from like the organizational research world, is when employees witness leaders exemplify curiosity and compassion in tight spots, in tough spots, it actually elicits loyalty, and because it helps create an environment that we can use the word emotional safety, for example. I'm kind of veering away from the psychological safety because I think these the conversation has become so diluted with the psychological safe space and all of that we're getting into a place where we don't have the space to actually have the boundaries and be tough as well. So it's seems to be a little bit of a difficult ground right now, but that's a different thing. So true compassion, which means that you meet other people looking at their humanity. So I always say that be tough on tasks, and your goals, but we be human to humans, and gentle when we are dealing with the soft tissue, of human life, because we're all on a journey and we all have our past stuff, that makes us vulnerable, So I think the foundation for a lot of this work can be traced to Barbara Fredrickson, who's researched positive emotions and how they actually broaden and build even our cognitive capacities. So when we feel that we're in a space of trust and it's safe to take risk, and we are being witnessed with benevolence, we're able to tap into our problem solving, we're able to tap into our courage and risk taking and all of these. So those two are, they go hand in hand. And that's why it is like softness is actually really the tough stuff, because it helps open up these reserves in us that we haven't maybe years ago, 10 years ago, realized that it's the paradox, that it's actually the softness and the compassion that opens up, all these results, and the ability to perform, because that's what we also want to do in life. We want to achieve things. It's part of the curriculum of human life.
Yes. And this is where I'm going to go back to your word that I love so much. I was going to put it in the title of my book until I saw your book, and I said I can't do that. But
Oh, what did I
revolution,
say?
revolution. This idea. There's an element in the world. I was going to say the United States, but I think it's not just the United States, but there's an element out there that is kind of on this discussion about, we want strong leaders, right?
Mhm.
Strong leadership. And here's where the revolution is. I think there's a battle between, do we want those strong leaders that don't care about us, that just have that, I don't know, the Elon Musk of the world. Let's just use that as an example. Elon Musk, strong leader. He doesn't give a lot of compassion, from what I can tell, to his people that work for him, but it works for him. All right. So there's an element of people that say that's the way our leaders should be. I'm with you, Elisabet. I think the leaders of the future are going to be those ones that have empathy, that have compassion, that have understanding, have kindness, have that soft side. All right. They can have the strength and they can have the soft side. So I think that's the revolution. And I don't know, who do you want to be led by? I'll ask you, the listener, who do you want to be led by? Here's what I've been playing around with in my head. Do you want to be led by Elon Musk, or do you want to be led by Ted Lasso? If you've watched the Ted Lasso show, he's a guy it's all about being positive and being kind and treating people well. I think that's the future. That's the future leader. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Maybe I stole all your thunder there, Elizabeth. You can tell I get kind of passionate about this, but I think that's where we're going. That's where we need to go with our people when we lead them.
Well, from this countryside of Finland, I'm not familiar with Ted Lasso. I would say that the answer doesn't lie in either polarity, either like extremity. But that's why the book is like gentle and power. There's two really polar opposites and two sides which are in the cover. So, and the bottom one is bold letters, gold bold letters, is power. So we need to be able to, without being afraid, that we have the strength within us, the fortitude, to look into that and be able to tap into it in ourselves. The book is an invitation for both gentleness and for both power. The book is an invitation to look into those parts in us where we have abused power in the past. Maybe we have witnessed it in our own lives. Maybe it was our parents. Maybe it was the leaders around that we have seen who have abused it, which has kind of made us go that we don't want to have anything to do with this. And yet power is a reality of life. It is exchanged in every encounter that we have with other people. And we can leak it, or we can consciously cultivate it, like in Qigong, or through martial arts, or through whatever the practice is. And we do need that power, and we do need the mental fortitude also to lead ourselves in these tough times, which are upon us right now, and it doesn't exactly look like they're going away yet. So there's going to need to be that power and toughness. And then here comes the thing, which to me, I feel like this will be a lifelong journey, that I will never run out of stuff to work on. Because how to stay tough without coming forceful, how to be not hard, but hardy. So it is almost the impossible task of being this embodiment of life force and toughness, so that people do know that they can rely on you, and yet have it be held in this container of pure compassion. So it's the combination of those two. And it always speaks to me, like it's in the Tao Te Ching. Maybe it's chapter 28, maybe 23, but it says that we must know the yang, which is the tough, hard, masculine energy. It's the structure, it's the forward goingness, it's the toughness. We must all must know that, but we must abide to the yin, which is the compassion, the nurture, the softness. So our toughness needs to kind of be embraced in that container. So it is a combination of those two polar ends, I would say, a uniarchy.
Yeah, and I would add that, you know, a lot of people will say that leaders need to never show, you know, that softness, that weakness. And I think we would both disagree with that. But I want to kind of pivot this conversation. You recently did a multi-day run. I don't remember how many miles it was, but it was long, and maybe you can talk briefly to that. But the funny thing about it was, and I'm going to quote from your book, you said, and this was running across New Zealand, you said, surprisingly, my run across New England taught me way more about surrender and suppleness than strict resolve and rigor. And so, again, these are those two things that seem to be at odds. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you went through a little bit of a moment during that run where you said, okay, should I keep pushing or should I pull back?
Mm,
And what does that look like? And how can we navigate that?
mm. Yeah, there's that run for me was part of my PhD research on SISU. I was a little bit, you know, when I started to research SISU and I realized, okay, we have this concept we've had for 500 years in my native culture, and it's like one of the most precious words in the culture, you know, and it denotes life force and fortitude in the face of extreme adversity. So how do you actually go and research something and, you know, life force, like what a nightmare to actually do the research on such a elusive concept, you know? So I decided that maybe the best way to go on about it is this laboratory's N of 1 and experiment on myself, because you can't really get an IRB approval for, you know, put people in a burning house and see what happens, how their SISU works, you know, and it's not cool, not ethical. So that journey for me was part of the research, but it also turned into this pilgrim into my own make, you know, and who I am. And of course, it's easy to think like, you know, you have to run thousands of miles, I would say, because I ran before I went there. I started training to run the length of New Zealand 2 years before the run would take place. And so it's easy to look at that kind of a run, just like it is easy to look at our lives, you know, that whenever we want something, we just need to stay tough because we're so hardwired for that, maybe of the narratives that we see around us, you know, maybe from our parents or wherever we grew up, you know. Maybe we haven't seen a lot of those narratives that show us another way. And for me, I would say that the most important discovery from all of those, it was 1,500 miles. And I ran 12 days consecutively, 30 miles each day for the first 12 days. And then I encountered an injury that was so bad that it forced me to change my tactic and pivot. And so I added cycling for that part. And I was able to kind of mix those two until the foot was better, and then kind of just keep on going, powering the journey through my own body. And we organized events along the way as well. It was this campaign to speak for creating compassionate cultures. And it was especially to break down the silence around interpersonal violence, emotional abuse, physical abuse that men and women are experiencing. So that was kind of the core of that on a personal level for me. And after those 12 days, the big epiphany was how hell-bent I was in doing the run in a certain kind of way. And then I started also feeling this, what I interpreted as an expectation from the outside world, where I was following the drumbeat of not my own, but the external world, which can happen to all of us so easily, that we set up on a journey and there's something we need to do. And suddenly we're actually running at another beat that is not ours. And that had happened to me too. And oftentimes these are imagined, like people are generally pretty busy doing their own things. So in our minds, we can forge a narrative, and then suddenly we're living someone else's life, in a broader scheme, it can even happen. So there was a point, I was having this very intimate dialogue with the road, since I was there all the time. So I had a lot of time. And at some point, because the road was kind of asking me questions, of course, it was my inner dialogue, but it was challenging me. And at one point, the road said to me that, Elisabet, do you see that next bend over there, miles away? And I said, yeah, I see it. It's like, well, guess what? There's going to be another bend after that bend, and another one, that you will never run out of road to run. You can run to the end of the earth if you want. And then, because I was in so much pain at that point, the realization, kind of the message from the road for me was that the pain will end when you make it end. And on a personal level, just realizing how, in a weird way, because I was so conditioned to be such a warrior and to be such survivor, that it was easier for me to be hard on myself than to be gentle and soft. And there's the thing, we need both of these worlds, and that's where my shell cracked. And that paved the way to all of this, kind of the SISU 2.0, and realizing that it is not just about that mental toughness. Because when I gave in that moment, there was a softening that happened in me. I was able to kind of come back to my senses. And again, that positive emotion, which can also be a sense of safety within oneself. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. But something softened in me, and I surrendered to not try to control and force the outcome. And I was able to find more strength in me to actually carry on. So it is the paradox of gentleness, which is for all of us there too. There's a lot for us to unearth in that topic.
Yeah, that is so deep, right? I think to myself, mental toughness or sisu doesn't have room for surrender, right? I mean, we think this, right? And that's why I go back to, if mental toughness is all you have in your toolbox, that's not enough. And so that's a hard thing, I think, for a lot of people that are very driven, very, maybe type A personalities, to say, this is a time for me to surrender. This is a time for me to give in. I know for me personally, that's a hard thing to do, because then I go, am I no longer tough because I've now surrendered? And so this is a hard thing to sit with. And I come back to this idea, and maybe you can help me with this, Elisabet. Do I do hard things? And I'm speaking for myself here. Do I do hard things to maybe in some way punish myself? That pain, like you said, the pain will end when you allow it to end. And so why do I put myself through this pain? That, when I read your book and I read that passage, it's like, wow, it was like a mind blow of what's been driving me to inflict pain on myself. And by the way, if you're doing an ultra marathon, there's going to be some pain involved. And so I don't know. What do you think? Is that maybe self-punishment, or maybe a different word?
I think, I would even invite a little bit of gentleness to even that, because, in a funny way, to do hard things and kind of punish ourselves, it for a lot of us, it might be, it's familiar, it is a way for us to kind of align our behavior to something that in our past allowed us to survive and control the situation, So for someone, if we develop a certain kind of coping pattern as kids, if we don't, let's say, I'm not saying this is yours or my, the patterning, but when we don't necessarily, let's say, get the softness and the attention and the care from our caregivers as children, one attachment style we can create and adopt is what's called, for example, avoidant. So we realized, okay, we don't get that safety and that affirmation from the external world. We're going to turn into ourselves, and we can always look here to, solve everything, to push through, to achieve. And that can be a really good and powerful formula for achievement, for being super mentally tough, getting all the awards, running the marathons, and all of that stuff, because it aligns with our pattern that we know that works for us, and we're so used to the pain, So for me, one of the big changes has been to really slowly let go of this need to always learn the hard way, and just allow there to be a little bit of balance. That what can I learn through love and softness, and self-care? Does it need to be so tough all the time? And it was a realization for me that I learned that I was following a pattern there. And I just want to blow your mind a little bit with because you mentioned the title of the book a few times, and it says revolution. And when you look at the word revolution, what do you have in the middle backwards? You have love.
Wow.
I know.
It's cool.
It's like, so the book is kind of structured in a cute way that there's so many little, because it's so personal to me. So these tiny little codes everywhere, the revolution, it's about love, and we can use words like compassion and connection and, all these things. But ultimately what it comes down to is like, are we able to love and keep our heart open when things get tough, and stay in the moment with our partner, when we feel like turning away, have the hard conversations, but yet see the human that's there next to us, and the cover of the book, which is this ocean blue, and it has these golden lines. It's the idea comes from Japanese art called kintsugi, which means that it is to repair something that has been broken with gold. Because they had this practice that when a vase or some kind of a art piece would crack, instead of throwing it away, you actually mend it with gold, and it becomes even more precious because it's not thrown away. So the message of the book is really to take what is the most precious in us, which is our courage to love in spite of, we all have been hurt by someone at some point. It sometimes doesn't even make any sense to be vulnerable, or to give a second chance, or take that risk to be soft in a world where it really only makes sense to have, this shield and go with that to the outer world, So it is an act of courage. I would say it's an act of rebellion to bring gentleness into this world, what's going on right now. But at the same time, we also need toughness, we need gentleness, and we need the power. And you put those together, and that's superpower.
Yes, I think that's a powerful combination. I listened to one of your previous podcasts when I was doing research, and you used the word, especially when you had that moment after 12 days in the race or the run, where you said, am I honoring myself? Can you talk more about that? What does that mean to you? When you come to that decision point, should I push on or should I pull back? Should I surrender? Should I keep moving forward? I think each of those has its moment and its value, but how do we make that decision? And I think maybe you're saying, am I honoring myself by moving forward? Is that kind of what I was getting from that?
I love, you really are picking up these gems from the journey and from the book. There's kind of two things. I'll try to remember to bring them both here. One way to tell if our SISU is constructive, because we all have those moments in our lives that, just like what you are alluding to, that should I push on and ramp up the ante, or should I pull back and lessen the pace, or should I quit, or should I continue? And they're always personal. There isn't really like a one size fits all. But one thing we can do is to ask ourselves that if I continue with this practice that I'm doing and it feels super tough, and yes, we do need to do tough things in life. It's just part of life. We need to show up and do the heavy lifting at times. But if I look at myself doing this thing over and over and over and over again for a long period of time, is the end result such that it is life-giving? Is it going to take me to a place where more life can be expressed and it's good for me, it's good for the other people, or is it the opposite? So projecting oneself and kind of simulating a long-term thing of what will happen. And to ask, am I honoring myself? That very useful tool came to me from a man who I really respect a lot and who is gentle power. And he is Mark Allen, who's the 6-time Ironman world champion. And I had the honor and luck when I was living in the US some years ago that I got to take part in a retreat that Mark was facilitating with Brand Secunda. And it's called along the lines of, healthy body, healthy spirit, but it's kind of the idea of bring the body and the soul together, And when the retreat was over, I told Mark that I have this completely crazy dream and this thing that I'm training to run the length of New Zealand, that would you have one advice for me? And he's this really gentle man, like what a tough human you have to be that you win 7 Ironman world champions. It's a tough thing to do one, but then to go to that level is a completely another thing, And so he has managed to not become hardened by a hard thing that he's done, but he's done that alchemical near impossibility that you remain soft while you're being tough. So he looked at me and he said that the most important thing that I want to kind of remind you of just to honor yourself throughout the process. And this wisdom landed in my memory and in my lap when I was on that day 12, when I was really struggling. And I kind of projected myself another 38 days into the future, day 50, when I would be done with the run. Let's say, imagine that I did it and I look back how I did it. Can I say that I honored myself? And I honored other people. What is the legacy I live through this? Like, do I do it at all cost and maybe risk some kind of permanent injury? Is that the story I want to tell? And that allowed me to know what to do in that situation and really take the run to a different level, because I saw how deeply it impacted and moved people that I was able to change my strategy and not push onwards like hell-bent, even though we celebrate those stories, when someone doesn't give up no matter what. But here's the message of SISU as well, that we are humans, we are not machines, hopefully we'll never be. And that is the beauty of this path of SISU. When you start to follow it, when I follow it, it is always an invitation to really know who we truly are. And it's a path in honesty. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves to also change our minds about something and fail, but with those successes and failures, they together form that beautiful map of life, and the quilt. It consists of all the colors of life.
So much wisdom there. I think maybe if I were to sum that up, it's okay. For all the listeners out there, and even for me, I think I need to hear this message. It's okay to, whatever word you want to use. I always say winners do quit. I don't like the saying winners never quit. That's ridiculous. Winners are just smart about when they quit. My coach taught me there's 2 types of quits. There's a shit quit and there's a legit quit. And sometimes, we've got to do the legit quit. There's a good reason for me to quit. And if you're listening to Elisabet here, and we should be, are you honoring yourself? And again, if you don't like the word quit, use pivot, use surrender, whatever it is that I think feels good for you. But I think the message here is you're exactly right. We celebrate the people that have the broken ankle and they keep running the ultra marathon, right? And I've read these stories and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how do they do that? And then I think to myself, should we be celebrating that? I don't know. I'll leave that to everybody to think about. But I do think there's room here for that idea that we don't
Mm,
always have to push on, and that's okay. And maybe it goes all the way back to the beginning of this. You will still be loved and you will still be accepted if you don't push on always, right? And I think that's for me. I think I'm always looking for that somebody to say, I'm proud of you, right?
mm,
So if I'm tough and I keep pushing on, that somebody's going to go, wow, you're awesome, Ron, and I'm proud of you. And I get that acceptance. But here's the
mm,
thing, I'm still the same person, whether I keep going or not. Right.
mm,
And I think that's a tough one. I don't think it's easy for all of us to say,
mm,
especially when we embrace this idea of toughness. It's hard for many of my friends to quit, right?
mm,
And I have a lot of my friends that are ultra runners and Ironman triathletes and that sort of thing. So I think there's a message here for all of us, though, that there's some wisdom there.
mm, mm.
Elisabet, I want to keep going, but I know,
Let's do a 5-hour podcast.
yes, I know that I'm actually at this point being a little bit rude that I'm taking you over time, and so maybe one
Oh,
day
I'm good.
we could get on and have another discussion because I seriously could do this for many hours. There's so much more that I wanted to unpack, but let's start to wrap this up. How can people buy your book? And by the way, I'll have all this in the show notes, but how can people buy your book and maybe work with you? What do you have going on? Those sort of things.
Hmm. So sisulab.com. So everything is there. There's a link to the book as well, Gentle Power. And by the way, the audio, so I read that myself. And
Ah,
yeah, it was a really wonderful experience. It's the first time ever that I'm did anything like that. And to work with me, I would say that so there's a quote that I heard from Ram Dass. It was some podcast with him, from the 80s or something. And he said that until we're all free, nobody is free, or that nobody's free until everyone is free, so it speaks to that interdependence, interconnectedness that we have. So if it feels good, after this podcast to choose one practice that calls to you. I'm speaking to both of us, speaking to all the listeners, that will help you cultivate that life force. Maybe it's a leakage that you block, or it's something that you do to nurture that life, that gold, and connect that to your daily routines gently. So in a way, I'm just being a little bit philosophical now, but that's a way to work with me, because when you work you work kind of with me, and then when I work on myself, I work with you, because everything I do on my private time when nobody's watching, which is SISU, it's a form of that integrity, that when no one is looking, what do you do? And that will be shown, when I show up to people. And so that's why that personal work is so important. So that's a way to work with me and you and us and all together.
I know that is so beautiful. I got to say it. That is, I love that. Yeah, work on you, and the whole world's going to get it's been said in different ways, obviously, but that's really at the heart of what you're saying here. Is I think all of us need to do that inner work and make the world a better place. So I'm with you. I'm with you, Elizabeth. I'm still a work in progress. I've come a long ways, but
Yep.
I'm going to still continue this. And even after this conversation, and I can't wait to finish your book. There's plenty of things that I'm writing down notes of. Okay, I want to work on this. I want to explore this. I want to look closer at this. So there's a lot of things that are sparking questions for me to kind of get to
Mm.
know myself better. So I hope that you guys
Mm.
go out and I don't know. I highly recommend Elizabeth's book. I've gone through enough of it to know this is a book that you're going to like. And so check it out. And my students that maybe are listening, you're going to have to read this summer. I've decided. So
Oh my God,
it'll
that's so
be,
cool.
yeah, it'll be fun to see
That's a
what they think
milestone for
about
me.
it. Yeah, yeah. So I think they're going to enjoy it. So
Hmm.
let's get to the last question, Elizabeth. It's always a hard one, right? And we do hard things on the Forging Metal podcast, but and you're
Hmm.
obviously familiar with SISU.
I'm up for a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your biggest challenge if you feel safe to share? And what
Hmm.
did you learn from it?
My biggest challenge. I think I'm gonna, if you allow me, I'm gonna go to the original form of the question, which is my biggest failure.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm like, I'm up for the task. I'm always up for taking the little bit, the demanding road. It is, I would say, the first thing that comes to my mind is, and while I honor myself that I couldn't do it earlier and I didn't know. So I did what I could with the knowledge that I had at the time. But the biggest failure, I would say, is to not sooner realize and recognize and understand the interdependent nature of us as humans, that how determinedly I tried to do it on my own. And I closed off and I closed my heart off from people near me, and it didn't look like that. I was doing things that were very like social and all that, but inside me, I was a one woman army and one woman warrior for a long time. And yet, I have so much compassion for that woman who really had to survive, so she had to do those things. But I think I wish that I would have understood that earlier, but maybe it's part of this life developmental phase, the good old 40s, or something like that. But maybe not a failure, but I do admit my shortcoming there, because this is important, like to find unity, not create division, and have the courage to keep the heart open. It's magic.